across the state, different legislative groups would come together and support the legislation we were at. Now we're playing defense. I haven't been down there having any success in doing anything proactive for several years now. It's all about watching the fiscal notes, watching what comes by my desk. I get all the fiscal notes for the county, and then trying to stay on top of it to get down there and testify against things instead of testifying for things. And that's a big change.
And so what's an example of that defensive kind of situation?
Okay, just a couple weeks ago, I went and testified against a bill that was geared towards utilities and telecoms. They wanted to take away local government's authority of doing class action lawsuits. And so what that means is they're able to then pick off the small jurisdictions that don't have their own county counselor, or their prosecutor doesn't have the understanding of civil law, which is governing instead of criminal law. And so they can get some momentum getting rid of them, and then they only have to deal with us that are larger, where we like to, when we have the opportunity, work in concert with our small communities and come together as a whole and try to move forward, because that's using your tax dollars a whole lot wiser. Senator Sifton said to the telecom person that was testifying in support of this bill, he says, "You're telling me it's more cost effective to do 114 lawsuits than one?" So that's the bottom line, kind of.
Right. And what was the answer?
He didn't answer. But the last time there had been a class action lawsuit, it was against AT&T. AT&T lost, and local governments got $65 million worth of tax money that was owed to them that AT&T was not paying.
Right.
That's a huge amount, and we're being hit on every corner, whether it be internet sales or different things or the legislature taking away our authority to do a fee or a permit or whatever. But we have yet many more responsibilities than we had 24 years ago.
Right.
So that's just an example.
Okay, that's great. And so the idea about constantly playing defense makes sense in the structure that you have.
Right.
Michael, you have a little bit different structure, and it's not so much defense. Maybe it's a little bit. It's like you're not even allowed to play the game, maybe.
Well, sure. Just to make one difference between Boone County and the City of Columbia, City of Columbia has a charter. So rather than only having limited powers that are given to us by the state, we have the powers that we've claimed by putting together a charter. But those charter powers are continuously eroded as we have preemption bills because even as a charter community, we still are given our powers by the state. And so the state has added to the list of things that we cannot do. An example that got me involved is we passed Ban the Box, that does not allow businesses to ask about felony conviction on job applications until a provisional job offer was made. We negotiated that. We talked to the business community. We had a number of public hearings that were widely attended, and it passed 7-0 with widespread support. But then it was added as part of an ALEC boilerplate legislation that's put out by a national Republican group that preempted, because these things have been passing in cities across the country. And so the state sought to preempt that, living wage ordinances, and then it ended up being the Ban the Box piece was dropped off, but the plastic bag ban piece was added on, and that was passed as Senate Bill 722. So that's where I got my feet wet with state lobbying, and as Karen said, playing defense. It was interesting to me that when I went down and talked to state senators about the plastic bag ban, that they were under the impression that we had passed the law, because it got a lot of media attention about having a conversation on it. And it was a hornet's nest when we considered it. It was brought forward by the Energy and Environment Commission and citizen activists. We had a good, vigorous public discussion about the 50 million disposable plastic shopping bags that the City of Columbia generates each year. And then we decided that not to do it. But just having that conversation provoked a law that now bans any community from making any limitations in regards to shopping bag law. And also Kansas City, St. Louis considered living wage ordinances. Those also were preempted. And they were put together in the same piece of legislation, even though the Hammerschmidt Amendment clearly states that there has to be a relationship, but you can't have unrelated items. But no one's been able to explain the nexus to me between living wage law and plastic bags.
Well, you can always hope that there's somebody who can do that. Just talk a little bit about preemption bill. Like, what exactly is it? Do you have to?
Well,
this was one of the things you were just talking about, a plastic bag bill, and then all of a sudden it became you can't do it. So when does that enter into the stream? Is it after you? It's obviously not after you pass something.
Sometimes things can be passed after they're passed because state law trumps local law. So we could pass something through a valid process and then have that ability taken away from us. Another great example is that cities have long, across the nation, have had the responsibility for regulating transportation companies, taxi cabs. And when Uber came to our community, we recognized that they were a different type of organization. And so with much public discussion and public hearing and in something that was fair to the existing taxi services, we passed some reasonable legislation around Uber. But Uber then has gone to the state legislature and then is attempting to pass a state law that would take away our abilities to regulate ride-sharing services. We have a fiber network that we've considered opening. Right now it's a dark fiber. We use it for our own purposes, and we would look to open that up to provide a service, try to get gigabyte service to the entire city. But then the telecom companies fear possible competition, and so they have used their lobbyists in the state to sponsor legislation that would take away local communities' ability to provide any service that competes with a private sector company. So we get this amazing overreach, really driven by large corporate interests and large unregulated campaign finance regulation. Definitely, I agree with Karen that term limits have been a disaster, that we've lost our historical memory, and it's become an opportunistic place where people use the legislature to catapult into higher office. And lobbyists have increased their control because there's not people who understand the process. But also our lack of campaign finance legislation allows big moneyed interests to have overwhelming power in regards to the state, and that's not in the interest. You see a lot less of that in local government, where you can still, in Columbia, whoever knocks on the most doors wins. It's not who raises the most money wins the election, but you can still win an election by getting out and shaking hands and talking to folks and making your case person to person. It's a much and I also go to the grocery store and I go to church services and I see people on a daily basis, and that makes me cognizant of the effects of the laws that I consider passing. And so the state is one step removed from that. And it's also a piece of irony that in at least Missouri with our Republican-controlled legislature, that there's so much, we'll talk about states' rights and overwhelming federal power, but they continue to pass unfunded mandates and erode our power to rule in our own cities and counties.
Well, there's, where do you go to have an unfunded mandate? I mean, that comes down, and you're sort of the buck stops with you guys, right?
Yep.
Well, they truly do, because we do the law enforcement and fire protection and sanitation and stormwater and sewers and water and the things that matter to most people's lives, but our ability to fund those essential services continue to be limited by the state as regulations, both state and federal, add to the complexity of what we do and our ability to do it. Our ability to fund those essential services become less and less.
If state government would pay their bills, for starters, to local governments, we would have less local taxes on the ballot to vote on. If they would pay for the school funds at fully funded formula, the school wouldn't be before us right now with a 65-cent tax levy for operations, because the state should be picking up the majority of that.
Right.
The prisoner per diem for the county, those are state prisoners. They cost us $40-some a day at the minimum, and we're getting like $20.58.
Right.
from the state, only if they go on down to the penitentiary after they have been convicted and sentenced. So our citizens are picking up all those state prisoners. That's just money that takes away from law enforcement. It takes away from hiring more police officers and those kinds of things. So if they just pay their bills, we'd all be better.
That would, right. I think, you know, the buck stops down here, but the buck never goes the other way.
No,
You can't always, you know, say, excuse me, here's our bill. So,
And their meetings are held during the daytime. The city meetings are held during the evening to make it easier for people who work. As I got to try to make, I couldn't testify in any of the hearings that were held on the bills of interest to me because I have a day job.
right.
And so it's just less accessible. It's all the way in Jeff City. I really feel for the people who live in the Boot Heel or live farther away where it might be a 4 or 5 hour drive to Jefferson City. How are those local folks? But they have very much reached to their local county and city officials where we could have a much more robust and participatory sense of democracy if more issues were left to local government control.
Right, right. Well, Clint, it wasn't always this way, right?
No, certainly not, actually. I think
Tell us about the good old days, Clint.
given the story we've kind of built here, I think we might be surprised to learn that Missouri was perhaps one of the originators of the idea of home rule, of giving cities some of their own powers, right? Written into the 1875 Constitution. It's the first time that home rule was written into a constitution. Over time, problems emerged, defining the line, what's local, what's the state's responsibility is very difficult for the courts to do. And the state legislature in the 1970s essentially changed the game a little bit and made it so that the courts wouldn't have to draw the line. They just said that state law is supreme, and even these chartered cities like Columbia are subject to the wills of the legislature. So.
And is that where the preemption comes in? Is that now the state legislature sort of has that final hammer that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So once they got rid of these kind of separate realms for the state and the local authorities to kind of control, once they kind of got rid of that, the solution that they saw was essentially these chartered cities can do anything and everything so long as we tell them that they can't. And the issue is that over years, these preemption bills have started to pile up, and you're getting more and more restrictive legislation coming out of the state legislature in terms of political subdivisions, especially chartered cities.
And just from your research, is this just a Missouri thing, or is it going on around the country?
This is pretty standard. The relationship between states and cities tend to reflect, or very similar to the relationships that we see here in Missouri across most of the states. There are some exceptions. I think that polarization, we're not the only state with polarization. We're certainly not the only state with term limits. And so these are some recent things that have been occurring in state legislatures that certainly can contribute to this becoming more visible, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think we're alone in this. I don't think so, no.
I think we're seeing a lot more punitive action for things. I think the university is a great example. Yeah. You know, they're mad at somebody and they're not looking at the long-term consequences of their actions. And they want to be very punitive this session. And I think that is abysmal to me. I just can't imagine thinking that I know everything about how a university should run, and that what is going to happen when that kind of funding is taken away. It's not going to be the professors. It's going to be the janitors, the support staff, the graduate students, those kinds of things, because those are where, and it's going to hurt families. It's going to hurt business. Our local businesses are going to hurt because there's not going to be as many jobs of people working. Social services are going to be needed more. I mean, it's just that ramification of a snowball effect, and we're not thinking down there.
The University of Missouri is the economic driver, not just for Columbia
Absolutely.
and Boone County, but for the state of Missouri. And they were elected to the state legislature to improve the lives of the people. Nobody ran on, we're going to hurt the economy for a petty political difference, because we don't like how someone was handled through their employment law, because we don't like how certain protests were dealt with, because we don't like the fact that someone voluntarily resigned, that they're going to damage an already fragile economy. So not only do we have a state legislature that's not doing anything effective to move us forward and advance our cause and improve the lives of their citizens, but they're actively undermining valid attempts to improve the lives of their citizens.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good, you know, the overreach, if you will. The university has a good example where now the university needs to look at as many levers as it has to try to generate enough revenue to run the university, except the state government has said, the legislature has said, you can only raise tuition, you know, by the inflation rate, and that limits what, you know, that's one lever that's totally gone. Well, meanwhile, that, you know, well, you guys know that all the time because they do that all the time. So what is the term, you know, some things, maybe term limits aren't here to stay forever, but maybe they will be here, that we have to deal with them for a long time. Do you guys see some other things that maybe can make this situation a little bit more tolerable?
I think we need to remember, like what Karen talked about, that it hasn't always been that way. Like, you know, that as Clint mentioned, and that there was a time when we partnered, that we looked beyond our own narrow partisan interests, and that we worked together as partners between local government and state government. You know, it's not that long ago that we had a much better relationship. So, you know, and fundamentally the power resides in the voters. You know, in some sense we get the government that we deserve, and that people have become disengaged and don't follow the process. And so the answers are to become engaged and to follow the process and to find, to make sure that your voice is heard. Because fundamentally it's votes that elect politicians, and it's only the influence of money because we allow that to be. And so I'm hoping that as we have increasing levels of dysfunction, that it's going to be a wake-up call, that it'll be a call for change and to re-engage in active citizenry. One of the things that I've tried to do is always run positive campaigns, and that's increased voter turnout. I'm from a real working class ward. The demographics say that we shouldn't vote, but the last 2 terms, at least in city council elections, it's been positive and upbeat, that I have only talked about the positive things that I would like to do in the city and not tried to undermine the support of my opponent. And I squeaked out a narrow victory, but it was also, we increased turnout. And so I think, you know, that if we had a different kind of politician, that there could be success with moving away from sound bites and partisan rancor, that we can really work to try to make things better, communicate a positive message, and not just run down the other guy.
I think social media has had a negative effect also on politicians and elections and people running for office, because of the viral effect of stubbing your toe in a stump speech becomes the world message. You know, everybody makes mistakes and everybody tries to learn from them, but if every time you turn around they're throwing that same thing back at you because it's gone viral all over the community and the country or wherever, and I think that an immediate satisfaction, gratification society that we live in is another problem. And government runs slow for a reason. You know, if you jump and try to pass something too fast, you probably have missed some of the impact it's going to, and that's kind of what I was talking about with the state. You're going to miss some of the really important impact it's going to have on a segment of your society that you didn't think about. That's why we have the rules we have, that you have to go through public hearings and you have to have openness and involve people. And I think that people they think it goes too slow.
Right. And that could be, social media and the internet and everything is
Right.
instant, so
Right.
why is this taking so long? I think the other thing, we talked a little bit about how local government really understands the issues the best. So in the environment we're in now, you do get these unintended consequences occur all the time,
Right.
And if, like you were talking about the university, well, we're going to take that funding away from the system, not
Yeah.
the campus. You're fine. Well, what's going to happen, right?
It's going to hurt 4 campuses.
It's going to hurt 4 campuses.
Predominantly not Columbia.
Yeah,
It's going to hurt
I
the
mean,
smaller campuses.
You
because
know,
they're the
so
ones who-
that's the unintended
money.
consequence that's not being talked about. When you take it away from system is 4 campuses,
Right.
and it's just, those are the kind of things that we need to guard against as citizenry, and we need to be involved, and we need to have our voice heard on what our thoughts are and help our legislators understand impacts that maybe haven't been spoken about.
And you may not want to answer this, but do you think that the state legislature understands that they are overreaching and that what they're doing is having unintended consequences and it's maybe not the best way to run a state?
I think it says in the Bible that everyone is righteous in their own eyes. It's hard to, and you get in an echo chamber. And I can even in local politics, it's difficult sometimes for me to buy my own lunch or to buy a drink. It can become warping where you have a lot of public attention. And I see that in the tiny little bit of local celebrity that comes with city council service. I can only imagine what it's like being in Jefferson City surrounded by lobbyists and having
And away
that.
from home.
And away from home.
You know, we're different here because our legislators come home at night, have their family here. But when you think about coming from St. Louis, Kansas City, Springfield, Cape Girardeau, in North Missouri, they don't get to go home. So they're surrounded by the like of themselves with those lobbyists and stuff that Mike talks about. And so you live in a fishbowl and you don't see that beyond that fishbowl.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We get jerked at the grocery store or at church or wherever, and we should. If
Right.
there's something we're doing that our citizens are not happy with, they should be able to walk up to you at the grocery store and say, why are you thinking about doing that? Or why did you do that? And I'd rather them ask me than write about it and be mad and not find out why I made that decision.
Well, and having your finger on the pulse of Boone County and Columbia is important. That's what the citizens want. It's too bad that it's a struggle to have it be meaningful in the end, really, because of what is coming the other direction. So we're at the end of the program, and I want to thank my panelists who did a terrific
Well,
job.
thank you.
I think it was a really fascinating discussion. We could go on and on and on. Maybe they'll have us back in April. And I also wanted to thank our director today, who's Sean Brown, and our crew, Justin, Autumn, and Amy. It's been a terrific show, and we'll see you next month in April. Thank you.